Hello, and welcome to this webinar on the performance management cycle. My name's Louise Holloway, and I've been an HR and training specialist for well over 20 years. Over my career, I've worked with a range of businesses of all different sizes, based both in the UK and internationally. And my passion is supporting managers and organisations in getting the most out of their most important asset, their people. Today, we'll be focusing on the performance management cycle. So what it is and how we can use it to support the development of our employees for the future. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on my website shortly after the session. I'll start by giving a presentation on the topic, and then we'll answer any questions that you may have. If you do have any during the presentation, please put them in the chat and I'll answer them at the end. So, I think the first question to answer is, what do we mean when we say performance management? What is it that we think of? Well, unfortunately, for many people, the words performance management bring up an instant image of someone doing a bad job. However, if we look at some definitions of it, we see something quite different. For example, the CIPD say that performance management is about creating a culture which encourages the continuous improvement of individual skills, behaviours and contributions to the organisation. Whereas the Chartered Management Institute say that performance management is an integrated approach to helping an organisation achieve its aims and objectives by monitoring and improving the performance of individuals, departments, and the organisation as a whole. If we look at these definitions, we see no mention of poor performance. These definitions concentrate on continuous improvement, individual skills, behaviours, contributions to the business, and organisations achieving their objectives. Overall, a much more positive view than that of other businesses. So, what does that mean for us? Well, firstly, there are a few myths around performance management. The first one being that performance management happens twice a year at appraisals. Well, this is just wrong. Performance management is not something that should happen just once or twice a year. It's a continuous process that should happen all the time. Supporting employees in improving how well they perform their roles should be a key part of a manager's focus. The next myth is that performance management is always a formal process. Well, again, this is wrong. Performance management does not have to be a formal process. Conversations around performance can happen whenever an employee needs support, or whenever a manager sees the opportunity for development. Whilst managing poor performance should always be documented in some way, managers should be comfortable discussing development with all employees whenever the opportunity arises. The next myth is that performance management is only for poor performers. Well, why should the poor performers get all the attention? Look, yes, those who are struggling need to receive support from their line manager. But it's just as important that we allocate time to continue to develop those who are performing well. After all, they're the ones that are already contributing to your business. And if we don't make sure that they get the development that they need, they are the ones who are most at risk of taking their talent elsewhere. And finally, performance management is about tasks. Well, again, that's wrong. When we talk about performance management, it's important to look at the whole picture. It is possible to have an employee who does all of their tasks well, but causes problems for the business with their behaviours. For example, you could have a salesperson who hits their targets every single month, but leaves a wave of unhappy customers who would never buy from you again behind them. Whilst looking at the numbers may make you think that they are excellent performers, looking at the behaviours would make you think twice. They may be bringing the money in, but are they costing the business far more in dealing with complaints and other issues in the long run? So, that's some myths busted. Maybe it's the phrase performance management, or maybe it's just where the focus has traditionally been. But in fact, one of the most important aspects of managing performance is development. And whether it's a team member, a department, or a whole division, we can't achieve continual improvement without it. Development needs to focus on departmental and organisational goals and the capability, conduct, commitment, and attitude of individuals and teams. As I said before, it's important to remember that performance refers to both behaviours, so how things are done, and results, so what is done. As we work through the performance management cycle, it's important to keep both results and behaviours in mind. One thing to think about when we are talking about performance management is giving feedback. Whenever we look at improving how things are done or developing team members, it's vitally important that communication is kept up with the teams and the individuals involved. And a key part of this communication is giving feedback. So what do we mean by giving feedback? And why do we find it difficult? Well, when we give feedback to someone, we are effectively replaying to them what they did in a situation and highlighting the impact of either their actions or lack of actions. And we can find this difficult, usually because we don't want to hurt their feelings by telling them that they're doing a bad job. But if we don't give feedback, they will never know where they could develop. Receiving good feedback helps employees to change their behaviour and keep on target to achieve their goals. At the end of the day, a genuine feedback culture helps to create an environment in which anything is seen as possible. So, how should we do it? Well, in order for feedback to be productive and beneficial, it must be helpful to the person receiving it. To be helpful, feedback must be such that the person understands the information, so what it is that you're telling them, is able to accept the information. They understand why you are telling them and have clear examples of what they have said or done, and is able to do something with the information. So they should have the chance to act upon it. So, in order to give helpful feedback, you should be realistic. Direct your comment towards actions that your colleague can control. You should be specific. Generalizations are not helpful. You should pinpoint something that your employee can influence or change. You should also own the feedback. Using I statements wherever possible is much more effective than saying somebody else told me. You should be consciously non-judgmental. So describe a behaviour, you interrupted 3 times, and don't judge people, you are domineering. You should be aware of balancing positive and negative feedback. Positive feedback on its own allows no room for improvement, and negative feedback alone is discouraging. Just be aware of merging the two. Giving positive feedback followed by negative feedback followed by positive feedback will make the negative feedback less effective. And finally, be prompt. Delay in giving the feedback reduces the impact. Right, let me tell you a story. One morning, the operations manager comes in and finds an email from the operations director saying that 6 complaints about customer service have been received. The levels of service have been poor, and comments have also been made by visiting customers about the appearance of both the staff and the office. Now, the operations manager accepts this information well, acknowledging that the delivery of customer service is her responsibility. She then arranges a meeting with the team leaders in the department. She says that she will try to plan more time to observe the customer service centre and the quality of service being delivered. She will also observe staff appearance and the tidiness of the office. She asks each of the other managers to pay attention to these areas. As a result, a number of things happened. One team leader went away and did nothing. As far as he was concerned, the criticism was unjustified. Another team leader took no particular action, but did watch her staff and ask them to follow company expectations on service. The third pulled his team together and told them that the operations manager was on the warpath and they had better pick up their ideas. The fourth told his team to be aware, but didn't really think they had anything to worry about. Over the next few days, the operations manager observed the team. She made a few individual comments to staff about how they were delivering service, but generally didn't think things were as bad as the operations director had said. She was careful to support the team leaders and thanked them for making an effort. A month later, the operations director called a meeting with the operations manager, showing her 5 more complaints relating to service. He also expressed his own concerns regarding staff appearance and the state of the office. So, what went wrong? Well, it's clear from the story that the team leaders all went away with different views on what was happening, which means that the operations manager wasn't clear on what needed to be achieved, what that would look like, and how they would know when it was done. To have avoided this problem, she could have used the performance management cycle. So, what is it? Well, the performance management cycle was first introduced by Peter Drucker and gives us a model for consistently managing and improving employee performance, whether they are struggling or already performing well. It looks like this: plan, do, track, review. Let's break it down. The first action is to plan, something that our operations manager didn't do. In the planning phase, there are a number of actions that we need to take, and this will require thought in advance from the manager and will need to be agreed with the individual employee. So, firstly, we need to agree SMART objectives. So objectives that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. These objectives should describe something that is to be accomplished, a point to aim for. These form a big part of the do part of the performance management cycle. Objectives or goals define what organisations, functions, departments, and individuals are expected to achieve over a period of time and can be expressed as targets or KPIs. Remember that with performance management, we are looking not only for the results, but also the behaviours that lead to those results. The SMART objectives should align to what both the business and individual employee wants to achieve. For a poor performer, that could be reaching the required standards in a particular area. So by 30th of June, I will have completed all monthly reports accurately and on time. They could be, for a high performer, learning a new activity or getting involved in a new project. So by 30th of June, I will have attended 2 marketing meetings and come up with a proposal to improve relations. Next, we need to agree on the support that will be provided by the company, whether that's training, mentoring, technical support, or time. Then we need to identify barriers that could get in the way. This could be workload, getting time out of the office, or getting buy-in from different teams. Thinking back to our story, the operations manager only identified overall objectives, i.e. improved service levels and staff appearance. She wasn't specific about what was letting service down, how they were supposed to do it, nor how they would recognise it if and when they'd achieved it. She also didn't identify what was wrong with the appearance of the staff or the office. In addition to this, she didn't believe that things were that bad and didn't go back to the operations director for clarification on the problems. This meant that each team leader made their own assumptions and didn't really understand what the problems were. So, how could she have done it differently? Well, she could have agreed SMART objectives with the team leaders, which they could have filtered down to the teams. She could have talked to each team member individually or as a group and made sure they realised how bad things were. She could have established if the team were already aware of the problems and established what actions they'd taken or were planning on taking. She could have discussed what the complaints were about and how they would improve service going forward. She could have discussed the state of the office, how it had got like that, and how it could be tidied up and kept that way. And she could have been clear about the expectations on dress code and any problems that individual team members had with that. When in the planning stage, it's important to remember that, firstly, different people view things in different ways. So if you're not specific in setting standards and expectations, you will get different responses. Secondly, people will place their own interpretation on the facts. So it's important to check understanding and jointly agree the actions, the measures, and the timescales. The do phase of the cycle is where employees get to start making the improvements. They understand what it is they're supposed to do and what support is available for them to do it. This doesn't, however, mean that the manager can just sit back and wait for the next review. Key activities for the manager during this phase are ensuring that the employee gets the opportunity to learn. Well, this means supporting them with time and any additional training that they've been promised. Giving feedback and coaching. This doesn't have to be in any formal way, but commenting on successes and any failures as they happen, and supporting with any further training and resources that are needed. And the managers should observe progress against objectives. Does it look like they're improving? Are there any particular areas that they seem to be struggling with? And why could this be? For our operations manager, this could be going out into the office, observing what's happening, maybe listening to some customer calls, or observing employees on the phone. It could have been meeting regularly with the team leaders to get their feedback on what was changing, or where any problems were arising. Or she could have spoken to customers to see if they were seeing any improvements. The track part of the cycle is important. We need to consistently measure progress against the objectives that were set. At this stage, it's important not only to measure what has been done, but also the effect that the actions have had and the contribution that the employee is making to the business as well. This is because not all objectives will be achievable over short periods. So to keep track on how well things are progressing, we need to look at the employee's actions in the bigger picture and check that the objectives that we have set are moving towards the desired result. If we find that they are not, then it may be that the objectives need to be reviewed. Going back to our operations manager, there are a number of things that she could have tracked. So the number of complaints that were being received and what they were for. Do they still refer to the areas that we're tracking, or are they in new areas? How the teams are performing against the objectives. Are improvements being seen in one team more than the others? Are any of them falling behind? And what contributions are being made by individual team members to the improvement process? Are there any additional ideas on how we could improve things? The final stage is review. And this is the point where we sit down with employees to discuss how they are improving and what needs to be done next. Reviews should be held regularly, a meeting set up in line with the objectives. This could be weekly, monthly, or even quarterly, depending on what it is that needs to be achieved. Remember, these reviews are milestones and not the only conversations that will be had. During the review phase, we should reflect with the employee on how it's gone, celebrate any achievements, discuss any failures, and agree on next steps. In our example, the operations manager could have set review dates with the team leaders and set an objective that they would do the same with individual team members for them to feed back to her. By following the steps above, the next discussion with the operations director would most likely have been very different. Whilst we can't guarantee that there would have been no further complaints, the most likely outcome is that there would have been much fewer, and the operations manager would have had a much clearer idea of why there were any and what was in progress to prevent them from happening again. The team would have also been much more involved in solving the problems that were causing the issues and would have had much more personal buy-in to help them move the department forward. So that's it. An introduction to the performance management cycle. Hopefully, I've demonstrated that using this informal structure helps you to ensure that you can build and keep momentum when looking to improve performance in your teams. And remember, it is a cycle. So once you've reviewed it, it's time to start planning again for continuous improvement. And as always, do remember that it's not just for poor performance, but also for those who are doing well. And that is the end of the presentation. Hopefully you found the session both useful and enjoyable. If you do need support in managing the performance of your teams, well, why not get in touch? Alternatively, you can check out my other videos or sign up for my new online course, Recruiting People Fairly, which is being hosted via Udemy on my website. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.